Chapter 25. Buki and Malik. The brothers ran until their legs burned with effort. When they were far enough away, they stopped beneath a pink pui tree and tried to catch their breath. Their rest did not last long. The sounds of shouting and crying had erupted all over the island. From every corner the boys heard the clank of metal and thuds of hand-to-hand blows. The fighting seemed dangerously close to their little clearing. "We have to make it to the cave, brother," Buki said. Malik grabbed his hand and pulled him in other direction towards the fighting. "No, no, we have to go the other way. You don't want us to get killed, do you?" "Who will kill you?" a woman's voice asked. Buki felt a chill all the way to his bones. He looked around, expecting to see Severine, but instead there was another woman standing there. She had milky brown skin and sea green eyes, and was amazingly nearly as beautiful as Severine herself. She wore a long white gown, elbow-length white gloves, and a broad-brimmed white hat, all of which seemed to glow in the moonlight. Buki felt drawn to her. He took a couple of shaky steps in her direction. "Where did you come from?" The woman pointed out of the clearing to the top of the mahogany forest. "From there." "So you're a Jumbie?" Buki asked with a trembling voice. He took another step towards her. "We're not all so bad," the Jumbie said. She reached her arms out to Buki to draw him closer. "How old are you, little one?" she asked. "12, but I'm a big 12." Buki added when he saw one side of the Jumbie's mouth curl up into a mocking smile. "So I guess you're old enough then," she said. With her arms out, she kept drawing him nearer. "For what?" Buki asked. He turned his head to look for his brother, but Malik was nowhere to be seen. "Oh, don't worry about him," the Jumbie coaxed. "He ran off. He was too scared of me. But I know you are not. You are a big boy of 12, and nothing frightens you, eh?" The wind picked up then and shook the last remnants of the smell of the pui trees down from the branches. But it stirred up something else. Something that smelled sharp and rotting. Buki's nose wrinkled. "What is that?" he asked aloud. "What, dear?" the Jumbie asked gently, though her sea-green eyes had become hard like glass. "You don't smell that?" Buki asked. As he did, the wind picked up the ends of the Jumbie's long gown and blew them back. There was one sleek brown leg and one hairy cow's foot. The Jumbie tried to rearrange her clothes quickly, but it was too late. Buki already began to back away. The Jumbie's face contorted into an angry grimace, and she grabbed her skirt and moved towards him. She only made it a few awkward steps when she fell to the ground, stunned. Buki gasped as he watched the Jumbie writhe in the dirt. Her legs were tied together with rope. Then Malik jumped out of the pui tree holding the other end of the rope. Before the Jumbie could untie herself, Malik bound the Jumbie's arms to her side. You will leave me here like this?" the Jumbie screamed. Malik nodded. "I will get you, I promise you I will," the Jumbie shouted. Malik pointed at the rope and shook his head. Then he grabbed his brother's hand and pulled him out of the clearing. They left the Jumbie screaming insults. Malik led Buki towards the sound of the fighting. "Where are you going, brother?" Buki asked. "You don't want to run into more like that La Diablesse, do you?" Malik nodded solemnly. "One of them will certainly kill us," Buki said. Malik turned away from his brother and pressed on. "All right, but if I get killed, I'll haunt you for the rest of your life." Malik looked back and raised both of his eyebrows. "Well, I guess if we both get killed, you'll have to hear me complain about it for eternity." Malik moved out of the clearing and back towards the village, with Buki following behind. In a few minutes the sound of the fighting was sharp in their ears, and the smell of mingled sweat, dirt, and blood hung in the air over the usual nighttime scent of the island. Clouds moved over the moon and threw everything into darkness. The boys bumped into something soft and stumbled to the ground. The clouds parted again, and they found themselves on the ground next to the little old woman. "Sorry, grandmother," Buki said quickly. He and Malik reached out to help the old woman back to her feet, but her skin was fire hot. They both pulled away and shook the heat from their hands. "Are you sick?" Buki asked. "You should not be out on a night like this, especially if you're not well. Who do you belong to? Maybe we can take you back to your family." This time he bore the heat of her hand to pull her to her feet. Malik did not touch her. The old woman smiled but did not let go of Buki's hand. Buki tried to pull the old lady off, but her grip was like a vice. Buki began to scream from the pain of the heat. The old woman began to shudder a little as if she was cold, but the skin around her bones loosened and slid off, revealing a fiery body inside. She was a soucouyant, a malicious fireball that would suck the lifeblood out of anyone, even a baby. Her skin pooled around her, leaving Buki holding the empty shell of her hand. He shuddered and let it fall with a slap against the rest of the discarded skin while the flame body gathered up into a ball and hovered a few feet above the ground. The boys turned and ran to the village with the soucouyant just behind them. In the streets all around them, people were fighting Jumbies. Buki and Malik darted around a group of fishermen who had surrounded a lugahoo, battling to take it down with hooks and nets. Bloody claw marks covered one fisherman's arm. Down the road, a small band of Duins were crawling all over a house, getting to the windows and doors, with people inside and outside trying to beat them away with brooms, garden rakes, and an oar. Malik clenched his fists and seemed about to dive into the fight, but Boogie grabbed his arm and dragged him towards Hugo's bakery. The soucouyant was still on their trail. Boogie pushed his brother down next to the outdoor clay oven and crouched beside him. The oven was warm, its coals still burning deep inside. Several feet in front of the boys, the soucouyant hovered in the air. It darted and turned looking for the boys, casting an orange glow on all of the fighters. "Fire in front and fire behind, eh, brother? Too bad you really can't fight fire with fire," Buki said. Suddenly, Malik smiled and patted Buki hard on the back. Buki yelped, and Malik put his fingers on his lips. The soucouyant made a swift turn and moved in their direction. Next to the clay oven there was a metal bucket. Malik picked up Hugo's tongs and reached deep inside the oven for some of the hot coals. He put these into the bucket and took one of Hugo's cloths to hold the bucket carefully. Then he pulled his slingshot out of his pocket. Buki saw the slingshot and understood immediately. He got out his own. As they crawled back towards the fighting, they picked up several stones and shoved them into the pockets. When they were finally at the side of the road, they loaded up their slingshots and started to shoot. The soucouyant backed up at first, but then it barreled towards them in a blur of flames. Just as it was about to engulf the boys, an oar smacked it to the ground. A hefty fisherman stood over the soucouyant as if in a daze. The light from the soucouyant's flame shone in his face, and the boys recognized him as Victor, the same man who had tried to get Kareem out of her father's boat. The soucouyant began to rise from the ground, and Victor lifted his oar to hit it again. A small lugahoo crept up behind Victor and hit him hard on the back. The wood from Victor's oar only caught the outer edge of the flame and passed through. Buki pointed at the soucouyant. "Aim for the center of the fireball. Only the outside is flame." Malik tucked his hair behind his ears and nodded. The man turned his attention to the lugahoo. He swung and his oar broke against the lugahoo's arm, leaving a sharp pointed end. He jabbed the point at the lugahoo while Buki pummeled the soucouyant with rocks from his slingshot. Malik scrambled closer to the fisherman and the lugahoo. With the cloth wrapped around his hand, he loaded a hot coal into his slingshot, aimed and fired at the lugahoo's body. The lugahoo spun around, roaring from pain. Its fur began to smoke. Buki raised his brow and smirked. "2 and 1!" he yelled at Victor. He gestured for him to use his oar like a bat on the soucouyant. "Send it there!" he yelled, and pointed towards the smoking lugahoo. Victor smiled and nodded and got the broken oar ready to swing like a cricket bat. The soucouyant lunged towards them both. Victor swung and connected. The ball of fire sailed hissing through the air. It struck the lugahoo's fur. The monster roared and screamed in an explosion of flames. Victor and Buki cheered as both the lugahoo and the soucouyant fell in a fiery heap. When the fire died out, a smoldering pile of ash was all that was left of the two Jumbies. The brothers leaned against each other, panting. "That's not the last of them," Victor said sternly. "Go home and leave the fighting to the grown-ups." The boys stood up straight and armed their slingshots again. Buki set his jaw and gave Victor a look that showed him and his brother that they weren't going anywhere. "All right then, men, let's go," Victor yelled, and charged with his plank down the road, where they quickly found another fight with yet another lugahoo. With a fierce yell, Victor raced in to help the men and women with rakes and garden hoes who were fighting in the beast. The boys turned to find someone else to help, and spotted a small band of Duins that had holed up behind the market wall. The creatures hurled huge boulders at some frightened villagers who huddled trapped against another wall. The boys loaded stone after stone into their slingshots and fired, but with no effect on the Duins. The villagers ducked, but the Duan's rocks came fast. Many of the villagers were bleeding from where they had been hit. In the midst of the flying rocks, Malik ran out and stood behind the Duans and the villagers. "Come back here," Buki shouted. Malik moved closer to the Duans. "No!" Buki shouted. The Duans ran out, tumbling over themselves to try to grab Malik first. As they got closer to Malik, they shouted, "Ooh, ooh, ooh," louder and faster. Buki was about to lunge forward to put himself in front of his brother, but then Malik sprang into action. He ran towards the villagers. The Duans were left exposed. Now the trapped villagers swarmed forward and surrounded the Duans. Buki clutched his brother's arm and tugged him away while the villagers fought the Duans hand to hand. The boys stayed on the road this time since all of their usual paths seemed to be blocked. "Are we being followed, brother?" Buki asked. Malik nodded and pointed behind. A figure was moving towards them near the side of the road. It wore a gray shirt long enough to hide its feet. Buki narrowed his eyes and loaded his slingshot. Malik did the same, though he didn't aim just yet. As the figure got closer, Buki dropped to one knee and pulled the slingshot taut, aiming for the head. Just as he was about to let go, Malik josted him, and the rock flew wide, missing the mark completely. "What did you do that for?" Buki pushed him. Malik pointed and ran to the person in the gray shirt. Buki scrambled to his feet and followed. "Kareem, you're alive! How? That lugahoo!" "It was luck. Its chains got caught in a tree. There are jumbies everywhere." "We know. The good news is you can destroy them," Buki said. But when Kareem began to smile, he added, "But it's not easy. It's not easy at all." Kareem gave him a firm nod. "Where's Drew?" Buki and Malik frowned. "She's not with you?" Buki asked. Kareem swallowed hard as the darkness seemed to thicken around them.